collaboration.
I know, right? All these newfangled podcasting platforms are pretty cool. Well, Chrisman, thanks for being here. Thanks for chatting. I just tweeted it out, so we are officially live on the Twitterverse. But to start off, why don't you go ahead and describe who you are, what you're working on, what synthesis is, and then whatever the new product, what you call that, what that is, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm Chrisman Frank. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Synthesis. The beginning of Synthesis was just me kind of having kids and freaking out about their education. And I got the chance to go tour the school that Elon had created at SpaceX for his kids and some of the other kids of the rocket engineers when he went through a similar freak out, several years ago. And through that, I got to meet the creator of that school, the teacher that Elon had hired, and I thought what they were doing was really amazing. And it kind of, it's based on Elon's first principles approach that education should be about helping the kids learn to solve problems. That too much of education in our current system was just learning this tool. Like he said, his analogy was like if you went to a traditional school, they'd give you like a course on wrenches and a course on screwdrivers, etc. And he wanted it to be like give the kids an engine to take apart, and then from that you can figure out what a wrench is for and what a screwdriver is for. And so Josh, who's my co-founder now, was creating that school and just kind of following that approach. And my oldest son was 2 at the time, and I was just blown away by what they were doing at the school. And I felt like I had to get something like that for my kids. And fast forward a couple of years, Josh and I become friends, and then the pandemic hit, kind of shut down all the schools. One, and then two, sort of showed everybody a window into their child's school, and just you just had
Mm.
this plummeting confidence in the existing system all of a sudden, where people were just kind of desperately looking for something new. And so we started a company. The first product was scaling up a class called Synthesis from that school, which is where the kids compete in team games. So they play on a team. They have this complex game where they have to make really difficult decisions and do that as a team. Sort of like the best part of what we're doing at our jobs, right? Is you're working with a team and it's unclear what the answer is, and you're trying to figure it out together. And so that was the first product we launched with about 3 years ago. It grew very rapidly and got a lot of attention from customers and investors and all that. And then about a year ago, a team from DARPA reached out and said that they had created the world's first superhuman tutor as part of a DARPA project at the U.S. Navy and wanted to work with us on bringing it to kids. And so that's I imagine what got your attention today is we just recently launched that. It's as far as we know, the world's first provably superhuman AI tutor. So the results, which we can go talk about a little later, are far in excess of what you would expect if even if you hired like the world's best one-on-one tutor to come work with you. The results from that trial are just way beyond that and kind of what we've you know hoped for with AI. And we believe that era of every kid having their personal AI tutor is very soon to be here. And yeah, we're that's the new product that we're rolling out now.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. But um, maybe let's start. I think AI is top of everybody's mind. Um, and, I think both of us have talked at length in different venues about something called Bloom's two sigma problem or two sigma theorem or whatever you want to call it. Um, do you want to start out by describing what that is and what that means in education? And then we're going to get to this, but I think the part that you mentioned that is most interesting to me is not, not reaching um, not reaching the same level as a human tutor. That's cool because you can drive the cost down and give everybody an individualized human tutor. But what's super interesting is doing something better than an one-on-one tutor, because that's been like the goal of educate, the holy grail of education for forever has been
Yeah,
one-on-one tutor. But you actually think
yeah.
there's something better than that. So
Yeah, the data from these DARPA trials indicate that it's potentially, you're able to go far better than that. But Bloom's two sigma to back up to that is By the way, I've had so many conversations about this with like investors and people who work in education technology, and I always start them off like, so you know Bloom's Two Sigma problem, and I'd say like 99% of the time they're like, no, no idea what is it. And I'm just like, what are you doing if you're investing in the sector? Like, what are you thinking about if you're not thinking about this? So Bloom's Two Sigma is the idea that everyone kind of knows, which is a one-on-one tutor is the best way to learn. It's why King Philip of Macedon had his son Alexander, who became Alexander the Great, tutored by Aristotle. Everybody kind of knows this. Bloom went and kind of compared tutoring to all the other methods that you could use to try and get better educational outcomes, and just found like tutoring is far superior. And it's put a number on it. 2 sigmas superior, meaning 2 standard deviations. Improvement can be made with one-on-one tutoring. You can't get that any other way.
So
Two
slow down
standard
and talk about,
deviations.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's easy to be like, wow, 2 standard deviations. Is that like, 25% better?
You tell me, yeah, if you have a better way to put this. What I say is like 2 standard deviations is to go from 50th percentile, so smack middle of the pack, to the top 2%, or is it top 2%? It's top
Yeah,
1.5%. So about
yeah,
top 1%. So
98th
it's like
percentile.
you're going
So
to
the
community
median student
college, and now
in
you're
one
going to the
class,
Ivy League. Yeah,
yeah, would outperform 98% of students in another class. If
yeah,
the exact same class, exact same students, one is taught in a traditional classroom, one is taught with one-on-one tutoring. The average student in class one would be 98th percentile in class B, I guess,
yeah,
versus A and B. But yeah, so
exactly.
massive, massive
And
difference.
so you can Google this as well. And another thing that's really interesting, that what happens is you have the traditional bell curve, right, where everyone's kind of distributed around a median. The Bloom data, it crushes the whole distribution over to the right side. So the top students, the top 1% already, they just get like off the charts. And then the bottom students, the 25th percentile students, get all the way up to like now they're top 10% students. So if that's why this is a holy grail of education technology, because if you had something like this and you could roll it out to every kid, just everybody in the world becomes as smart as like the top 10%, and your top students already are just off the charts incredible. And so it's, I don't know, people who work in education, obviously you named your company after this problem, so you're aware of it at least.
Allegedly, I cannot confirm that it was directly named after for trademark/copyright. It's a similar name
It's,
that has
it's a similar name. We
flower.
can leave
You
it
know,
there. Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, nonetheless, you're aware of the problem, and I think you talked about this like at your company. You're working on addressing that problem, right? Like how do we get one-on-one tutor outcomes for our students? And we're doing the same thing at the lower level grades like K through 12.
Yeah. So if you talk to somebody, I mean, Bloom to Sigma, that study has been around. It's got to be the most highly referenced study in education for like decades, right?
Yeah,
But
1984.
if you took somebody 20 years ago and you said, "Hey, actually, there's a way to have massively better outcomes. It's give every student a one-on-one tutor," they would say, "Awesome! That's so outrageously expensive that it doesn't doesn't matter." Um, so again, going
Yeah,
back to obviously AI changes the economic model of that entirely. So, kind of one layer deep. Okay, every student now has a one-on-one tutor, and it approaches free. It approaches zero cost in the long run. Although I'm sure you guys will have great margins. But what what's even more interesting to me is what you mentioned about going above and beyond that. So talk to me a little bit about that and about this this math tutor product. I don't even know if it has a name.
we just call it
But
synthesis tutor. Yeah,
synthesis tutor. Okay.
yeah.
Um yeah, tell me what you've seen so far.
Well, so let me. The genesis of this goes back to this DARPA project. So let me kind of tell the story of this, because this is just wild, and it took me like a year to kind of fully process this. So we announced like our last fundraising round with Amjad and Balaji leading that. They wrote great blog posts, put it out on Twitter like a year ago. And when that happened, we just got like a bunch more attention. And the one guy reached out, and he was like, I was a computer science student at Stanford. I joined this company, like a secret, like DARPA project, which DARPA, by the way, is like a pool of, it's like secretive, like US government, Pentagon entity that funds moonshot projects. So they funded the internet, early GPS, the first self-driving cars. They take money and they put it toward people who are doing interesting things and try to get these crazy results. So this guy told me, I worked on this project. Our goal was to take students in the U.S. Navy for the field of IT and take people with no experience and make them as good as people with 10 years on the job experience. And we were supposed to do it in 16 weeks with the digital tutor, which would be far in excess of, these guys probably didn't know about Bloom's Two Sigma, the DARPA guys. So if they did, they're overshooting it like, extremely, right?
Yeah.
And so what they're looking for is, zero standard deviation, zero difference between someone who's trained on the digital tutor, as they called it, the digital tutor, and someone who has 10 years on the job experience, right? That a zero outcome would be amazing. And so they worked on this thing. They spent $100 million on it. It took them 10 years. And at the end of that, what they found was they got not just zero, but they got a +4 standard deviation improvement for students who were trained on the digital tutor. And so to put that in context, if you take 10,000 people who are untrained in IT, you have them join the Navy, they take the Navy's training, they do the job for 10 years, only 1 in 10,000 of them would be as good as the average student who is trained on the digital tutor. So basically, you take all these kids, train them on the digital tutor for 16 weeks, and they're effectively geniuses, right? So way beyond. When you compared them to the standard classroom training that students got in the Navy, it was 8 standard deviations above the norm. So it's just completely like off the charts, insane. Like basically, like you're comparing across species at that point.
Yeah, your brain's not like 8 standard deviations is such, it's like it's hard for like that's where it becomes difficult for human minds to like it would be like
It's
taking
not
your average
statistical.
like high school golfer and having them be like top 3 in the PGA tour. Like it's just it's
It's
ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's these are like fairly small sample sizes, but the tests have like a really broad range. So you basically just get the idea like, okay, this group of kids on the tutor, like they know it to a degree that's just like extreme, like a categorically different. And one of the funny things about these studies was that they asked the students who did the tutor, they're like, is it a good teacher? And they just go, no, the content's just really easy. Like, I didn't think the thing was like
Hmm.
very good. Just the content is easy. And you're like, well, if we look at the results, either you're just all of you are 1 in 10,000 geniuses, and this is just the most fortunate coincidence ever, or it is doing something that's really amazing. And so they came to us with that. It took me, like a couple months to like wrap my head around it and dig into all the data and do go through the demos myself and actually believe what they were telling me because I was, like Bloom's Two Sigma has been around since 1984. People have been trying to create like the AI tutor since then. There's not been any success and people have basically stopped trying. Like if you look at what other companies who build like adaptive learning apps claim,
Yeah,
it's like
there's a
0.25 standard
15-year
deviations.
there's a 15-year cycle where everything was just like, oh my gosh, we're gonna use software and have this personalized. Like it was buzzword worthy within education, but
Yeah.
none of it worked well enough to like it didn't work. Is the fundamental thing.
Yeah, it worked okay. Like 0.25 standard deviations isn't nothing, but it's not like civilization changing, right?
Yeah,
And I see this with a lot of the products that are out there now. And I think this is fundamentally the wrong approach, but they're kind of meant to be an add-on to a teacher. So they're like a support for a human teacher, which just like doesn't solve the problem, right? You still need a human teacher, and it's nice to give them tools. But like one, that system just doesn't seem to work. And two, what we observed with the DARPA trials is like you can just take the teacher completely out of it. Like you can get far better results with no teachers at all. And I don't think anybody believed that before they started those trials, but seeing the results, I'm a believer, and now I've seen it with kids and we don't have the data like that yet for the kids, but they are
well,
engaging with it, and you can just see them thinking to a degree that you don't see with other products.
even beyond the incredulity of whether or not an AI tutor is superior to a human teacher, like this is something that we experience pretty significantly. Their entire the entire education ecosystem is currently built around there's a teacher who does the teaching, and then everybody else is sitting in a classroom
Yeah.
listening. And
Yeah.
all of the architecture, all of the laws, everything is based on that. And
Right.
to the extent that there are states that we have to do crazy stuff in because they're like, oh, who is the teacher? And you're like,
Yeah.
it it depends. Sometimes
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody. But yeah, so sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent, but take me deeper into what you've discovered and what you've seen so far, and then going from there, like, where do you think that leads? Because it's it reaches the level of difficult to wrap your mind around what that means in the future. And like if you were Mark Andreessen sitting there with like Netscape, and he's like, "Yeah, actually, there's going to be YouTube 20 years." You can't predict,
Yeah. I
uh,
think that's right.
but you've probably played that thought experiment out further than most people. But where do you think this goes?
I think the same as you. Like every time I try to think about it, I'm like, it's impossible. It's just like a singularity, right? Like what would it be like if 75% of the population has 800 math SAT scores? Like you can just think about this in different areas. Like what does the political conversation look like when everybody is not only math literate, but top 1% of the
Best in the
population, like what
world.
we have,
Yeah.
like how does that change, right? I think it's like really, really difficult to say. Like, what can we build? What kind of engineering marvels will we build with the population that's educated that way? Um,
So the first
I
order
Yeah,
effects are everybody gets really good at math. That's awesome. You can take the median student and they're now winning the math Olympics, right?
yeah,
That's incredible. Um, but yeah, it's really different. Like the second order of that. Okay, now you have it might be 20 years from now. Now you probably see this on a shorter time frame than that even. Okay, if you have millions of math, effectively math, not quite math geniuses, but like everybody can do math at an incredibly high level. What does that do to society? What does that do to engineering capabilities? What does that do to job markets? What is that? That's really difficult to wrap your head around.
yeah. It's just another. It's like a thing that's going to be added to everybody's skill stack, right? Anyone, you'll be able to get to what the top, but like way beyond what the top 1% of the population is today. For this is costing right now. We're selling it for $350 per year. But like you said, I mean the cost comes down. As we get more students and the AIs continue to get trained and get cheaper and that. So it's just it's hard to wrap your head around. I mean, I can't. I just can't imagine. I just think it's it's one of those things where the effect of that on civilization is I think it's actually what people are saying about like the AI models and like LLMs and that kind of thing. I think it's going to be way more true of humans getting trained by AI tutors because our tutor, like we call it an AI tutor, but it's not AI. Like it's not creative, right? Like the way that humans are. So it's sort of like, we have calculators that can do calculations for us, but they can't reason creatively about what they're calculating. And I think that our kind of bet is that there's humans are still going to be doing that creative work, and humans trained by these AIs that are specialized in teaching math, teaching physics, chemistry, etc. That's just going to I think it's like a civilizational level up because it's technology moves the civilization forward, and now you're going to have, I don't know, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 times as many people that can contribute to that. What does that
Okay,
do? Who
so
knows?
yeah, I think we could spend all day ruminating on what the future looks like n years from now. Um, but I'm also interested in like the nitty gritty,
Yeah,
as much as you can share of how does this get built? How does it work? What can it do? What can it not do? What does it take to expand and extrapolate its abilities and to reach into other subjects?
yep,
Um, so let's go back in the storyline. Some random Stanford DARPA guy reaches out to you and says, "Hey, there's this, and we're seeing ridiculous results." And you're skeptical, and then you spend a little bit of time with it, and then you're like, "Okay, there's actually something here. What do you do from there?"
Well, you have, you have further things that you're skeptical about, right? Like they're 18-year-olds in the Navy. Everybody, by the way, first, and I did this too, like you overestimate what the Navy 18-year-olds are like. So people are like, well, they're hardworking,
There's some selection
they're
bias
wanting to get a
here.
job,
There's
they're showing up on
yeah,
time and stuff, and they're like quickly disabuse you of that notion, right? They're like, this isn't like the top of the population. These are people, they're in the Navy for like, they didn't like have MIT or the Navy to choose from, right? And but still you have that like, well, they are adults, right? They're 18 years old, and they do have like, they do have to be there, or they're going to get a discharge. So the question is like, are kids going to be able to interact with this in the same way, and are they going to, what you see, we call it like lock in, right? So you see the kids use it, and you're watching them interact with the tutor, and you just see that their eyes are like locked in and they're super engaged, they're facing forward, as opposed to when you're in a classroom where the kids are kind of fidgeting and looking all around, and they're not really able to focus because it's just like, it's boring, it's not holding their attention. And so the first thing is, let's get some demos out and see how the kids are going to react to it. And so we did that. That was, 6 months ago is when we first started getting these out. And right away you could just see like the kids are, they're just like completely locked into it, and they're talking, they're speaking out loud to it. They're treating it like a person. When you interview them afterward, they're saying he or she. They kind of place their own persona onto it, which is something that we knew had happened from the DARPA, but it was really exciting to see it with kids. I think they kind of get even more into it. Um, and so you saw that, and that was really, I put my son down on it, who was 8 at the time, and I just saw him like, he's the kind of kid who doesn't, you can't get him to do math for love or money. Like he's just not interested in it right now. And I put him down in the tutor, and he's learning these fractions lessons, and he's just locked in for like 45 minutes, and I'm just sitting there like waiting for him to like storm off or something, but he's just into it. And you can start to form some theories about why that is. And it really just comes down to, if you watch like a video or something like that, it's someone like talking at you, like lecturing at you. It's just really hard to stay focused for, any length of time. But in a conversation where there's a back and forth and you're expected to respond, and someone's just continuing to probe deeper on your thinking the way a one-on-one tutor does, it's just really so much easier to stay engaged. And so that's what we observed. That was kind of like the first thing. And, we just have incredible ratings from the kids now on, how much they love interacting with a tutor. And the challenge is building out the content, which is the second thing that you asked about there.
so
And
first
that, yeah,
before we, I
yeah,
think for for people who have never used an AI tutor before, it's a little bit, let I've used Chat GPT and I've asked Chat GPT questions, but this
yeah, yeah,
isn't that, right? If you're an 8-year-old, you're not going to be like, hey, talk to me about
right.
multiplication, right? So help me understand the user
Yeah,
experience of what using this AI product is.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think the chat GPT one's an interesting place to jump in, because you see what people do is they know about a subject, and then they go ask it questions. And kids are, that's if you hired like Aristotle to tutor your kids, you'd want him to kind of be leading the discussion a little
Yeah.
bit, right? Like what should you be interested, what could you be interested, the kids aren't going to ask these like sophisticated questions about mathematics that took humans thousands of years to develop, right? It's just it's hard to know what questions to ask. And so it is leading, it's saying like, by the way, you can try our demo. It's up at synthesis.com/tutor. It's open to anybody. There's no login required or anything, and it'll teach you binary numbering. If you whether you know it or not, it'll walk you through the world's kind of best explanation of binary, and just it'll go back and forth with you. So it's constantly probing your understanding. Whereas ChatGPT, if you ask it a question, it might respond with an answer. The tutor is always kind of, it might respond with an answer, but then it's going to ask you like a follow-up question, right? It's
Right.
it's not just going to like tell you the answer.
It's leading,
It's
not
leading. It's designed to
yeah.
guide you to coming to this, to developing this knowledge on your own, the way that a really great tutor does it. A really great tutor doesn't just take your question and then respond with like, here's an explanation. And that's kind of what I've seen with the GPT attempts at doing a tutor. And even when the student's like, no, I don't get it, they're like, cool, let me explain it in a simpler or different way. And it's like, that just, it doesn't really work. A real tutor they kind of have a theory of mind, and they're forming an opinion. They're forming guesses about what you know and what's in your head, and then asking you questions to kind of try to probe deeper on that. And that's what ours does. And I recommend everyone just try it themselves. It's like really hard to describe in words, but try it yourself. And another thing that's really different from GPT is it's very visual, right? When you're learning mathematics, we have all these like visual aids and machines that you can play with to make things kind of more physically intuitive. So it's not just text based. There's visual. There's kind of a workspace. We put things there that the kids can kind of play around with and experiment with, and then the tutor can ask them questions about those. So it's more multimodal than GPT or any of the LLM type things.
Got it. Okay. Um, yes, I think for the folks that haven't, you know, don't just think it's Chat GPT, but good at math, because Chat GPT also isn't good at math, which doesn't help
Yeah, yeah.
the math tutor. So
There's
what?
another really important distinction actually, which is that these you've seen like what Khan Academy's approach is. It's to kind of like give a teacher a tutor helper, and we're not doing that. Like this we call it like a tutor, but it will just teach your kids math. Like for my kids, I don't have plan on having them do anything else for math. Like they're not going to have a teacher. This is just going to teach them math from scratch. That's the way the DARPA project did it for IT, and that's what we're going to do it. It's not like an aid. It's not going to help you with your homework. It is going to kind of like that scene in the Matrix where kind of Reeves downloads kung fu. Like that's what it's going to do. It's going to take you from zero all the way through without the need for a teacher at all.
Interesting. Um, so when you go about building something like this, where do you even start? Like what, and how do you know, now I'm shifting gears a little bit to, the founder, like builder side of things. Um, what does it take to have something go from DARPA project? By the way, DARPA didn't build anything for kids. It wasn't building a generalized math education. Um, so you have to, there's a decent amount that you have to do in just deciding, not deciding, but what is it going to teach you? How is it going to teach you? Where is it AI? Where is it hard coded, for lack of a better word?
Yeah.
How do you go about doing kind of the product discovery and initial build out of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I wish I could, boil that down to any kind of formula at all. The phrase that we use at Synthesis is conjecture and criticism, which we borrowed from the physicist David Deutsch. And I think that's basically how anything gets created. You have some conjectures about reality, which are just guesses, and then you subject them to the most rigorous criticism. So the best way to do it is in your mind, because that's, free, or at least that's the most efficient way to do it, is just kind of, can we poke holes in this? And then, really the best is like we also say, shake the box of reality. So how quickly can we get a prototype in front of kids, no
Shake
matter.
the box of reality. What I love that. Where does that come from? What?
I I I can't remember where I heard that. But yeah, the idea is like you've got the reality is like a box. If you don't like the shape of it, if you want to try to figure out what's going on and you can't really reason through it, then just shake it up and see what happens. I think Elon is really great at that, right? People see what he's doing with Twitter, and there's a lot of criticism of it, but he's not like, you can tell he's not like sitting around debating things endlessly. He's like, let's ship that feature and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's how we try to approach everything. Like we try and reason through it the best we can. But we're not going to sit in a room and figure out like, well, is this thing going to work with kids? Like the question is like, how quickly can we test that assumption? Right? How quickly can we sort of de-risk it, right? Which I think is just standard kind of startup process. And it's the hardest thing to just keep everybody, I'm sure you've experienced this as a founder, just keep, because the company grows and it gets more successful. And then the later people, it's kind of like, they have it like on easy mode, and so it's kind of hard to keep that sort of that energy around like, hey, test your assumptions, like just assume that you're wrong and go try to figure it out as quickly as possible by shipping things. I don't know, there's not really anything more to it than that. That's how DARPA came up with it. And we looked at the DARPA thing, like they ran the 4 minute mile. If you know the story of the 4 minute mile, everyone thought it was impossible. Someone did it. Now I was just looking up on Wikipedia. Like I think someone who's like 50 or 60 years old has done a 4 minute mile now. So it's like you go from completely impossible to like retirees can do it in a couple generations. And so we looked at it like that. Like there's it's possible to get these results that are just absolutely astounding. Can we do it with kids? Like we don't know, but let's get started. We still don't know for sure, but every indication is like it looks like the people who worked at DARPA have observed it, and they're like, yeah, this is what it looked like for us. Like you get this crazy engagement, and the kids are really thinking, and if you do it long enough, you're going to get those crazy results. So we will see.
So do you I'm also interested in this from a, person who builds educational products perspective, because like, I'm always jealous of the people who just like they build products and then there's one like monolithic user who comes in and it's like, you're for you it's probably more extreme where they're kids, right? And they have so many different like proclivities and personalities and things they do like and don't like, and not to mention, what is their background knowledge coming in? Do
Yeah,
they, how do
right.
you test this? Do you just grab a handful of beta kids and throw them in and watch it and see what happens, pretty much?
Started my kids are like always the guinea pigs. So yeah, you start with my kids and then the people in the company, and you kind of subject them to the earliest, crappiest version that you're too embarrassed to show
My
to a
kids have
real
tried
customer.
so many random educational products and apps.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to that. I do think that every kid having their different interests, I think is like a little bit of it's a little bit of like a red herring. Like when you're teaching math, the math is like inherently interesting. It's not that useful to connect it to Star Wars or baseball or something like that. We find that doesn't really matter that much. It makes the problem like insanely more complex. And, we just kind of find that like good explanations are good explanations. They're more or less universal. I'm sure there's like
Talk to
some
some
more
folks.
personalization we could do that, but I think that's like really negligible effect
That's the
as far
icing
as
on
I
the
can
cake
tell.
versus like,
Yeah. And
yeah,
it's done so badly, right? School kids are used to it. If they go to school or do anything else, they're used to like you have this really boring, inherently uninteresting thing, and then they put like a Star Wars character on it to try to get you. They know that that's BS, right? And so they learn to see through it. Like kids are pretty sharp about that kind of thing. So I just think that's like a dead end that a lot of people, yeah, I just think people haven't thought it through if they think just like connecting it randomly to the kid's interest is going to help them learn math or computer science. Like, I don't think that's totally true.
interesting. Yeah, so the I heard somebody talk about an interesting experiment that they ran where they uh I'm not going to say who or what this was. I hope I'm not revealing anything too secret, but they basically said, all right, we're going to take the Common Core curriculum and rewrite the entire thing using AI in the context of Taylor Swift, right? Because there's this one student who's really struggling.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's interesting, but it does feel hacky, at some point. Like it's difficult to like if you can get the kid actually interested in the math because math is interesting, that's an even higher order than like, hey, we'll take whatever your interests are and rewrite a curriculum around that specific thing.
Yeah,
Super
which it
interesting.
is. You can make connections to those things, but if the student's not finding the subject inherently interesting, it's like an uphill battle. It's like what are you going to do? Like give them candy and you know hope that that gets them interested in it. It's just like it's just not. It's just a dead end. It's like a really we've tried it. We've been trying it for years. You put all kinds of bells and whistles and cute characters on the apps, and it doesn't seem to be working, right? Like you need just like at the end of the day, like a good tutor. They do all this, right? A good tutor does this really well. So just focus on the problem of how do you get that really great tutor, their personality and the way that they teach into the computer so that we can ship it to everybody. And that's what we focus on. We think like the characters and relating it to Taylor Swift is like not. I don't think like a really great tutor is that's not necessary. right? It just overcomplicates things.
Right. Um, and yeah, I know it's super early. There's going to be a small n. All of the asterisks around what you're seeing so far apply, but what are you seeing so far in the actual? It's probably really early to you know hang up a mission accomplished banner or to say we've produced
Yeah,
outcomes. But
yeah.
what does the early data look like?
Um, the main thing we're focused on is like the kids love it. So that's been like the biggest
How do you
shock,
measure
kind of
that?
like right out the gate. Sorry.
Is that just anecdotally you talk to all the kids and they say we love it?
Oh yeah, we have like NPS data, and that sort of thing. We put like a video up on my Twitter a couple weeks ago, which shows kind of the sort of like extreme reactions. Like we asked them like on 1 to 10, how how much do you want to use this again? And the answers are just like one of the kids was like, I would rather freeze to death in Antarctica than learn math any other way than with this tutor. And you just get tons of stuff like that. So we're
Yeah,
not at the
that
stage
matters
yet where
more than
we're
like our NPS is 63. So it's like
yeah, well,
I would
but
cut my
if
arm off to retain
yeah, and
access
you,
to
you
this
get
thing.
a lot of these those kind of comments, and it's like that, and you see the retention is really great. So the kids are, and I've seen this with my own kids. It's like if I get them to do this the regular like homeschool curriculum, it's a fight. Like my 7 year old who's quite good at math actually, but he will do the thing where you're like, okay, let's go do 20 minutes of math work, and he like goes limp and like lays on the floor and like pretends like he's dead in order to avoid it. Whereas when I'm like, okay, we're going to go do the synthesis tutor, he's like, okay, cool. And then he'll sit there for like half an hour, 45 minutes, like really focused. And so that's like the first kind of, if you're doing consumer education product, the parents are not going to fight with their kids to make them go do this extra thing that they don't want to do. Like that's going to kill you dead in the
But with our
water. And
kids
so
enough, I don't need another
yeah, I
tutor
just
with the kids
it
over.
needs to be like I tell them to do it and they do it, or they're asking me for to do it, which we see a lot of that as well, which is like just shocking to us that the kids would be asking to do more math tutoring. But we see that like pretty consistently. And so that's like the first level. It's still way too early to get the data on like the number of standard deviations improvement we're getting. But we do see that like if the kids will do it, that's like obviously the first step. And then just is there like enough content there that they can go through, or we can standardize it to like a MAPS test or PISA test, which are used for the international rankings. Or I really want to just like focus on the SAT. So I think like get your kid in at 8 years old, and if they do this for a couple years, they're going to get pretty close to getting 800 on the math SAT, and that opens up a lot for them in life. And I think it's totally possible, and it's not going to be like backbreaking. You have to send them to some math camp that they really hate going to, or just sit over them with workbooks. Like I think that's really critical that the kids are enjoying it.
No, and it won't take 10 years either, right? Like if you got an 8-year-old who wants to spend a couple hours a day with a math tutor, they're gonna crush the same amount of time being spent in a normal classroom. It's not a fair fight.
Yeah, yeah, that was my previous job. I went around to like a lot of classrooms to kind of like observe, and my guess was that about 15 minutes of learning happens in a week. I've since seen data that indicates I underestimate a little bit, that it's more like 37 and a half minutes. Like if you spend 37 and a half minutes actually learning in a week, then that's like equivalent to school's performance. But it's that's kind of one of the things like a homeschooler is like I don't want to have my kids do like an hour of math class per day like in order to keep up, right? Like I want them to do less of that so they can. I want the results, like I want them to just know it, but I'm not interested in like having them butt in seat hour after hour, year after year. If they can learn it all in 6 months, great. Then we can go on and do other stuff.
Yeah, that's so we started homeschooling our kids a few months ago. So we don't even have
Oh,
a full year. But that's one of the things that's been most surprising to me. Um, my wife's doing most of the heavy lifting. But the the amount of time that stuff takes is just a tiny fraction of,
yeah,
when I think back on my, you know, I went to a standard public school, I'm
yeah,
sure they're
same.
no
Hmm.
different than 99% of public schools in the US. I'm sure there are deltas, but um, I don't know exactly what the multiple is, but they get the same amount of learning in 15 minutes that I would get in a couple hours, like very
Yeah,
legitimately.
yeah.
And you mentioned in your job before this, actually, so in interest of disclosure, I'm a tiny investor in Synthesis, um, but I didn't know what did you do before Synthesis?
I was the first engineer at Class Dojo, which is a ed
I
tech
did know that. I did
unicorn
know that.
company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at Class Dojo, you're running around and trying to measure all that stuff, and okay.
Yeah, yeah, and that Class Dojo made a free app for teachers to help teachers kind of stay in touch with parents, and so it's used in tons of classrooms. I just kind of went observing, trying to find out the problems, and I was, just horrified. One interesting thing was that every teacher who would let us come to the classroom was trying to get a job, like they were just trying to get out of the classroom, and
Interesting.
that's more pronounced. Like we're just seeing this incredible decay of the education system. The teachers want out of it. The families are trying to get out of it, like your family. And this is like one of the things that is I think just obvious to me, but I'm sure you probably went through this with Bloom as well, where you're like you're taking on this thing that just seems like this is the way it's going to be forever and it can't possibly change. Like you're going to have to go to college and get a 4 year degree to get like a good job. And people, although they say that they're interested in like disruptive things, like it's like, well, not that disruptive. Like this is like,
Yeah.
the background, like this is like the water that we, or
Like
the
work
air
on
that
the
we breathe.
outside of my mental model and like, move the needle a little bit, but like
Yes.
you can't disrupt, you can't affect the core thing, right?
Right,
Like
right,
that's
right. Yeah,
yeah, I've
exactly.
definitely experienced that.
And so I just think that that's wrong. That I think this education system that we have is at its like halfway point and is just going to decline from here. Like we've had this kind of Prussian industrial education model for like about 100 years, and it's just the cracks are everywhere, and it's just not clear that it can be fixed at all. Like I haven't heard anybody have like a clear plan for how this could possibly be turned around. And I think the parents like us are just going to turn to the internet, right? Like we buy products from Amazon, everything. We're just so incredibly well served by the internet that like when you have kids at a certain age and you're like, well, I need them to, and they need socialization and all these things that are like in person as well. But like when I want to actually make them smarter and focus on what they're learning, I think that people are I think there's going to be a huge part of the population that's going to turn to the internet so that they can get the best in the world. And, a lot of people disagree with me on that, but I just think I cannot imagine 100 years from now that we have the same kind of style education. Like humanity will come to an end if that's the case. So we got to do something to fix it.
So are you that's the other interesting thing about where synthesis is positioned, um, because it is effectively a B2C product, right? Your median user is an end user and their parents are paying for
Hmm.
access to whatever. And therefore, I would imagine on average, all of Synthesis's products are used outside of a class as like an extracurricular outside of a classroom
Right.
thing. Um, and so you probably run into some like you have to be, and you can't just like easily swap out a chunk of a kid's day, until theoretically you have the whole thing, you have the whole enchilada to replace. So you have to be interesting enough that kids want to do it outside of school, or
Right.
or parents are willing to pay for it outside of school. Have you done anything in terms of partnerships or kind of a B2B to C, or are there any other models that are interesting, or is that too much work and
Um,
nastiness and it's best to just go direct?
there's a lot that's interesting there. We've suffered from the problem of too much demand for our whole lives, and trying to scale, build the scale into the products to like satisfy the demand. So we haven't been super aggressive about the partnerships or that sort of thing yet. But I imagine there's a couple. The tutor is like really interesting because it's like a direct shot at the existing system. Whereas like
Mhm.
our team games is like it's hard to imagine how
It's
like a state
supplemental,
government is
right?
going to want to pay for that.
Yeah.
Right. And even at the, school that my co-founder created with Elon, that was like something that came after you had one-on-one tutors from Caltech coming and teaching all the kids math and science at like a really high level, right?
Right.
That's when you just, it's like everything in humanity, like you get the core stuff solved, and then you can open up for more interesting things to add on to that. But the tutor is really interesting because you can imagine where we get the data, then it's like, you go to, Governor DeSantis in Florida, and you're like, do you want to be the top of the international rankings on the math table? Like, just buy this for every kid in Florida for like one price per kid. So I think that's potentially there. And we've had a bunch of corporations reach out as like an employee benefit. They want to give this to their employees with kids. So I think there's a lot of interesting avenues there, but we've just been in the mode of like try to, satisfy, kind of having like wait lists and stuff like that, because we can't let everybody in who wants to do it.
Right. And then you have a breadth versus depth question as well. Like, is your approach, okay, we're just gonna totally take over. So you could
Mm,
you could say, okay, we're gonna take third grade and we're gonna replace the entirety of third grade with AI tutors. Or you could say, okay, we're gonna do math. We already have these math rails. We're gonna do math for K through 12 or whatever the equivalent is, and then we're gonna go
yeah.
on to yeah. How do you grow and expand, and how do you strategically know what to do next?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is something we thought a lot about. Like third grade is just like just it's a social construct, right? Like there's no such thing in somebody's mind, as like third grade math. There's just math, and so
But for your
it's
parents, it
yeah,
very much is, right? Like I've
yeah,
seen
sure.
I've seen so many education companies be like, or even alternative schools be like, yeah, there is no such thing as like third grade, and then 2 years later you turn around and they're like, yeah, so you're in level three, and you're like, oh, okay, like
Yeah. I think unbundling that from the age
right,
is a really interesting thing, and that's like pretty. I'd say like
pretty
standard
obvious,
on like upper middle
yeah.
class parents now. Like it's not the way everything works, but it's not so crazy to think like the kids aren't totally separated by grade. But I think math is like overlapping so much that it makes sense to just take this as like a vertical. And math is the every single person in the world needs to learn math. It's done very poorly. Most people either they just think they're not interested in it or think that they're really bad at it, in a way where like reading is the other thing. Literacy is like really big, but generally, if people, if you love your kids and read to them, they're going to learn how to read and be able to go read books on their own. That's the way they're going to improve that. Whereas math, that's not the case. Like that's, it's
Mm.
something where you still need like an expert teacher. Like your wife, I imagine, if she's homeschooling, if she's like mine, she's like, ugh, like how I don't want to teach kids math. Like, how do I don't want to sit there with them and do workbooks. I don't want to have like fights about it.
Very much
I want to
so,
like delegate that,
yeah.
right? Whereas she might really love reading books to them and getting them interested in books and talking about that and that kind of thing. So I think that makes most sense. It's just the biggest market in K-12 by far, and it's we're fortunate enough to be in this position where we have something that is, despite it being like a pretty mature market, we have something that's just way above and beyond, whatever else is out there, received by kids and by parents that way. So start there, and then like you were asking, like how do things change when you get this out there? Well, I just think people have they can learn way more, right? Like if you're learning what you learn in school and it's taking 15 minutes a week instead of 5 hours a week, then like, well, why don't you just learn physics and learn chemistry and learn complex systems and learn about markets and economics? Like just you have this time in your life where you're free to kind of learn and explore. So let's build out like the basics of everything and let kids really explore that and just get to a level of knowledge that people like us who wasted so many years in the public school system just can't even imagine. So that's ultimately what we want to build. Math is like the starting point, tip of the spear.
That's the other fascinating thing about, you know, now that I spend a lot of time around people who are, doing various educational experiments. And to be quite frank, I spend more time now than I did for around people who have a lot of money and have all the resources they want. I'm starting to see the earliest stages of people who like 4 or 5 years ago started saying, okay, you know what? Instead of putting my kid in public school, I'm just going to have private tutors for everything. And
Hmm.
they're going to come over to the house every day. And these parents are starting to run into issues where it's like, okay, my kid is 12. By he's gonna ace the GED this year. He's probably gonna ace the SAT next year. He speaks 3 languages, and he is starting to like trade penny stocks and he's 13, right? And like
Yeah.
um an interesting conundrum where society is not meant to like you always have those kids that go to MIT or whatever when they're 16, but like
Yes.
society is not prepared for kids to be adept 6 years faster than expected, and so there's going to
Yeah.
be I mean, the best problem to have ever, but what are kids going to do when they've crushed what used to be a 12-year school system in 6 years and they've aced it? What next,
That's
Uh,
like, yeah. This is a historically anomalous period, right? Like we used to enter the adult world 14, 15, 16,
right.
right? In some way. And now it's like 22, but that's historically not the case, right? If you look like Benjamin Franklin is one, he's like, he was working, you could enter industry and work at like the lowest levels. And then you've got, years of advantage, or you could go travel, or, I don't know what people are going to do. It is like, it's going to be this like looming problem. I mean, we just hired our first, synthesis student who graduated the program. We're like, we know that he's brilliant and that college is going to be a waste of time. So let's hire him. You get an early look at the market. Like it works out well for us. We don't have any requirement like you need a college degree. So I think that startups at least will benefit more initially. People who are willing to kind of break the rules and look past someone's age. But yeah, it's fascinating, right? Because our education system, it just the standards are so low that you don't even want to use it as a basis of comparison, because like what you mentioned of what is possible when kids get that tutoring and more effective ways of learning.
yeah, when you actually look at the data of like it's kind of depressing when you look at like the I think the average American is like, yeah, look, public schools are like, there's some roughness around the edges, but hey, so glad that we have public schools, which, and not just public schools too, right? It's not a like public versus private dichotomy thing. It's just schools in
Yeah,
general. The the bottom 40%, 50% even of educational outcomes are so bad. Like, frankly, the only reason we're graduating probably half of high school students is because what else are you going to do, like
yeah,
push them through the system. But
yeah,
that's one of the things I think that is lost a little bit in Silicon Valley, where somehow everybody you talk to considers themselves a gifted child, even if they weren't. um, you just lose sight to what normal is and how much improvement there is to be made. I mean, and what you're talking about isn't, taking normal and making it okay. It's taking normal and making it like absolutely incredible. So that's really awesome.
yeah. And it's like this. I forget where I heard this, but there's this idea like rich people, they don't get better stuff, they get weirder stuff. And I think the examples like the iPhone, right? Like you and I and Jeff Bezos and Elon all have the same iPhone. That's amazing. I want to build that, for with the tutor. Like I think we're gonna like the people who are really wealthy and can have a private tutor come over to their house. It's just gonna be weirder, but it's not gonna be better. And I think I already feel that way. If you try our demo, like on binary, if you hire, we had like a PhD in mathematics from Princeton University, and he's got 20 years of teaching experience. He's got a huge following. He goes and teaches math all over the world because he's so great at it, right? He's if you were gonna be a billionaire and hire a private tutor for your kids, he's the number one guy, and he'll tell you like the tutor, synthesis tutor, is better than having me, right? It's infinitely patient. It always says the right things. It's got these visual aids. You can't do better than that. And like that's the goal of technology, right? Is to get something that was like previously just like super expensive and unattainable, and then make it available to everybody and see what happens.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's a great way uh to wrap up. But man, thank you for and you mentioned the URL before, but give us the where people can go to learn more about this to get their kids signed up, or for some adults. I'm actually I can imagine that there would be adult usage. If I look at the map scores of math, even
Yeah.
though I think what's your target age range relative to the
I'd
standards?
say it's like perfect for like age 7 to 9 or 10 um right now, but rapidly kind of expanding. So move the by the end of the year we should have it like pretty solid through like age 11, like, and we target like top 10%. So if you're a top 10% kid at age 11, then you're not going to find it too remedial for you.
Okay, so you're right down the strike zone for my brother-in-law right now, and just kidding, kind of.
Not his
No,
kids, your brother-in-law, yeah.
no, it'll be interesting to see what adult adoption is like over time. Because I don't know anybody who's like, nah, I got all the math that I needed and I understood all of it, and I wouldn't spend a little bit of time to like the percentage of Americans that feel like they are they missed some percentage of their math education
Oh
has
yeah.
to be approaching 100. So
Yeah,
anyway,
you asked about this earlier, like what's the effect on civilization? I think one thing for me where I became an engineer like after college, I didn't major in engineering or anything, but learning software engineering and hearing kind of like the buzzwords like the like log like big O notation, and then understanding what that means and just realizing like, oh, I can just learn anything even if it's hard. Learning that hard stuff makes you, when people try to put one over on you and they're like, oh, you can't understand this, it's science. If you know the math, then you can be like, well, why don't try me, right? Because I think
yeah.
I can understand it. I think that's like a really interesting implication for civilization when kids are like, no, I think I can understand it because I understand variable calculus by the time I was 14. So I think I can probably understand whatever you're talking about. So why don't you explain it to me? I think
No,
that's like a really powerful thing.
I do very distinctly remember the time when I was trying to do something. It was like, you know, forever ago, trying to do something dumb and it's probably CSS or, something not super complicated and being like, oh, I wish I could do that. Like, I wish I were an engineer. And being like, wait, I'm just going to try and I'm going to
Yeah.
Google it. And you figure it out and it's not that hard. And like that, for some reason, that was like such a big mental barrier for me to overcome. Like, oh,
Yeah.
it turns out the difference between I'm an engineer and I'm not an engineer is just a self-described title and willingness to like Google and like trial stuff.
Yeah.
And of course you have to layer knowledge on top of other knowledge, but like that that mindset is so pervasive and we have to like beat it out of people. Be like, okay, look,
You mean at
no,
at your company at Bloom? Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, totally. For us too. The kids,
Yeah.
they, like you say, like for some reason, it's like, well, for some reason, you go through the schooling process, which teaches you, that there's that it kind of teaches you this like intellectual learned helplessness, right? And I think like removing that as a barrier for people is that's a huge deal. So you guys are doing it at Bloom, right? And we've hired some of your students, by the way, that are actually working on this, and they're great, and they have that attitude that they'll just go learn things and figure it out. And we hope to do that for kids at an even younger age.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for spending the time. Give us that URL one more time,
Yeah,
and then we'll wait.
synthesis, just synthesis.com.
Awesome, and then we'll wait for stuff to upload. And thanks for being with us.
Cool. Thanks, Austin.